Close your eyes and imagine a cold autumn morning. You wake up, step outside, and see your 25-year-old neighbor, who was perfectly healthy, collapsing on his front porch. He doesn't look human anymore. His skin has turned a deep blue, pitch black at the fingertips and lips due to severe oxygen deprivation. Blood is oozing from his nose, his ears, and even his eye sockets. Inside his chest, a brutal war is raging, his lungs are actively filling with a bloody fluid. He is drowning, right on dry land, inside his own body. That is not a scene straight out of a Hollywood fictional zombie movie. That was a normal morning in 1918. The most devastating pandemic in modern history swept across the planet, claiming the lives of 50 million, or perhaps according to the latest estimates by virologists, up to 100 million people. It wiped out 3% of the global population in a mere 18 short months. It killed more people than both world wars combined. But here is the truth that makes modern scientists shiver: the actual mortality rate of that nightmare was only around 2.5%. Pause for a moment and reflect on that number. With just a 2.5% mortality rate, human civilization staggered, crematoriums operated relentlessly, and mass graves had to be dug using industrial excavators. So, what would happen if nature were just a little more cruel? What if that number wasn't 2.5%, but 30%? Or even 50%? Imagine a virus carrying the destructive power of the medieval Black Death, but given wings by the 20th century network of railways, steam engines, and massive fleets of warships. Today, we will not only reopen the blood-soaked pages of hidden history, but we will also step through a multiverse portal into the darkest alternate timeline. A world where governments collapse in mere weeks, where the greatest leaders fall, where the geopolitical map is torn to shreds, and where our modern history is completely erased before it even has a chance to begin. Welcome to the most controversial scenario: what if the Spanish flu possessed the power of extinction? Before diving into the doomsday scenario, we must expose one of the biggest media deceptions in human history. Why do we call it the Spanish flu? The truth is, the peaceful country of Spain did not create this virus. They were simply the victims of their own honesty. While World War I was at its fiercest stage, the warring powers like the US, Britain, France, and Germany imposed a brutally strict military press censorship regime. They didn't want the soldiers in the trenches to panic. They didn't want the enemy to know that their armies were rotting from the inside. Only Spain, a country maintaining a neutral stance, allowed its free press to report on a strange disease sweeping through Madrid. And so, the other nations cowardly made Spain the scapegoat, attaching this deadly name to them. So, where did the killer actually originate? Cast your gaze toward the United States, specifically Camp Funston, Kansas. It was the morning of March 4, 1918. Patient Zero was recorded as Albert Gitchell, a camp cook. Camp Funston at that time was the largest and most perfect giant virus incubator that humanity had ever accidentally created. Over 54,000 young, healthy men, crammed together from rural areas across America into cramped, freezing tents, wallowing in mud and horse manure. In just a few weeks, thousands of soldiers began coughing up blood. But instead of quarantining, the massive American war machine kept turning. These young men, carrying the deadly pathogen within them, were packed into sealed train cars, traveling across America, and then stepping onto giant steel troop transport ships to cross the Atlantic. Those ships, effectively floating coffins, were drifting biological laboratories where the virus cross-infected, mutated, and grew sharper than ever. When those American soldiers set foot on the foul-smelling European battlefields, overflowing with corpses and rats, they officially ignited a global biological bomb. History might not have had to witness this tragedy if humanity's war machine hadn't inadvertently acted as a super shipper for the pathogen. What made the medical community of that era most desperate, and also the most terrifyingly distinct feature of the 1918 pandemic, was the demographic it chose to kill. According to normal biological rules, a seasonal flu draws a U-shaped mortality curve. It takes the lives of infants with weak immune systems and the frail elderly at both ends of the chart. But the 1918 H1N1 virus drew a freakish W-shaped curve. The highest, fiercest peak of mortality sat squarely on the demographic of young adults aged 20 to 40, those at the absolute peak of their physical strength. Why did this killer prefer to target the healthiest? Modern virology, based on breakthrough research from MIT and Harvard, calls this phenomenon the cytokine storm. The H1N1 virus of that year didn't just infect, it possessed a bizarre surface protein structure that tricked the human immune system into going insane. In young people, the immune system reacted too strongly. It mobilized all its troops, white blood cells and inflammatory cytokines, rushing to the lungs to destroy the virus. But this army lost control. In a frantic frenzy to protect the body, the immune system spewed out a massive amount of inflammatory substances, inadvertently torching the healthy lung tissues as well. The lungs ruptured, bloody fluid leaked from the alveoli, flooding the lung chambers. The victims didn't actually die from the virus, they died from the very incredible strength of their own immune systems. The healthier your body, the stronger your immune system, the faster you died. Let's dig a little deeper into this age mystery through the lens of antigenic imprinting. In New York City that year, statisticians discovered that the 28-year-old age group had a bizarrely skyrocketing mortality rate compared to 50-year-olds. The mystery lay in the year they were born, around 1890. The older people born before 1889 had previously experienced mild flu strains with structures relatively similar to the 1918 virus. Their bodies had retained a faint defensive blueprint, an immune insurance policy. Meanwhile, the 28-year-olds had grown up with the Russian flu, H3N8 strain, a completely different enemy. When H1N1 appeared, their bodies were confused and bewildered, launching misguided antibodies and subsequently triggering a self-destructive cytokine storm. This bloody lesson remains a guiding compass for epidemiologists today. In a pandemic, your birth year could very well be your death sentence or your ticket to survival. If you think the tragedy stemmed solely from the forces of nature, you are mistaken. The element that pushed the 1918 pandemic to its most horrific level of slaughter was the arrogance, ignorance, and greed of political leaders. There is no more perfect and painful example than the historical event in the city of Philadelphia, USA. In late September 1918, as rumors of a deadly disease were buzzing, top doctors in Philadelphia sent urgent letters begging the city government to cancel a massive parade intended to sell war bonds, the Liberty Loan Parade. They warned that gathering hundreds of thousands of people at this time would be nothing short of mass suicide. But the political officials, blinded by the pressure to raise funds for World War I and the arrogance of a rising superpower, extinguished all warnings. They declared to the press that there was nothing to worry about, that this is just the normal flu. The parade proceeded with 200,000 people crammed into the streets, chanting patriotic slogans, breathing the same air, and passing to one another the droplets carrying the deadly pathogen. The consequences came as swiftly as a death sentence. Just 72 hours after the parade ended, every hospital in Philadelphia collapsed. Thousands of people fell ill simultaneously. Nurses collapsed right next to their patients. Corpses piled up in hospital corridors, spilled out onto the streets, and were left abandoned in lockdown houses. Morgues ran out of space, carpenters couldn't build coffins fast enough. Eventually, the authorities had to mobilize garbage carts to collect the dead, and use industrial excavators to dig massive mass trenches in the suburbs. Over 12,000 citizens of Philadelphia were killed in just a few weeks, becoming one of the bloodiest urban outbreaks in history. On the completely opposite end of the spectrum, the city of St. Louis acted immediately. They banned gatherings, closed schools and theaters right from the very first cases. St. Louis's mortality rate was less than half that of Philadelphia. The blood of thousands of Philadelphians wasn't just on the hands of the virus, it was also dripping from the war bonds of political plutocrats. We often think of the flu as a respiratory disease, but the brutality of the 1918 virus strain reached much further. It crossed the blood-brain barrier and directly attacked the central nervous system of the patients. Tens of thousands of survivors of the pneumonia storm later fell into states of paranoid psychosis, severe depression, and even suffered from encephalitis lethargica, turning them into soulless shadows for decades afterward. But the most terrifying aspect was when this virus targeted the brains of those holding the fate of the world. Let's travel back to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. World War I had just ended. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, who brought with him the ideal of a fair, non-punitive peace, and a League of Nations to prevent war forever, was holding the upper hand. He staunchly opposed the demands of France and Britain to extort and crush Germany. But right in the middle of this vital negotiation, Woodrow Wilson suddenly collapsed. A high fever of 39.5 degrees, severe coughing. His personal doctor concealed the illness, stating that he simply had a cold. But those close to him realized the horrifying truth: the president's brain had been damaged. From a sharp, steadfast diplomat, Wilson began exhibiting signs of paranoia. He suspected the walls had eavesdroppers, he was obsessed with the idea that the French were surrounding him, and he ordered the irrational rearrangement of furniture in his room. Physically exhausted and mentally shattered after the viral storm, Woodrow Wilson surrendered. He abandoned all his initial ideals, conceding to every single one of French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau's harshest demands. The Treaty of Versailles was signed, dealing a horrific punitive blow to the economy and pride of Germany. It was this ruthless revenge that collapsed the Weimar Republic, creating a fertile breeding ground for hatred, hyperinflation, and despair. And out of that land of despair, a former soldier with a strange mustache named Adolf Hitler stepped onto the political stage. If the H1N1 virus had not invaded Woodrow Wilson's cerebral cortex in the spring of 1919, history might have had a fairer peace treaty. There would have been no extreme resentment, no rise of Nazi Germany, and tens of millions of lives in World War II would not have been incinerated. An invisible virus, millions of times smaller than an artillery shell, was the very entity that rewrote the entire bloody history of the 20th century. What you have just heard is actual history, a history where the mortality rate only stopped at 2.5%. Now, buckle up, because we are about to step through the portal of a twisted reality. This is where predictive models from Harvard University and geopolitical supercomputers outline the darkest scenario. What would happen if this virus underwent a minor mutation in its spike protein, increasing the attack power of the cytokine storm 20-fold? The mortality rate is now no longer 2.5%, but 50%. For every 2 people infected, 1 dies. You flip a coin to decide your life. With a 2.5% mortality rate, the 1918 economy only suffered a temporary recession. But at 50%, the concept of an economy ceases to exist. It is replaced by the concept of primal survival. The early 20th century world was run on coal, steam engines, and massive physical labor. Look at a megacity like London or New York. When half the miners in Pennsylvania cough up blood and die deep in the mines, the coal supply to power plants is severed. The engineers operating the electrical grid, people who cannot be replaced overnight, die. In less than a month, the lights go out globally. Clean water pumping systems cease to function. Trains, the steel monsters that transport food from the countryside to the cities, sit rusting on the tracks because the mechanics are dead and there is no coal to burn. The proud western megacities suddenly turn into giant traps. There is no fresh water, no heating during the harsh winter, and no food. Millions who don't die from the virus will die of starvation, freezing temperatures, and secondary diseases like cholera and dysentery arising from millions of unmanageable corpses rotting right inside apartment buildings. In the actual timeline, World War I ended with political treaties. In this 50% world, the war would end because there would be no one left to hold a gun. The cramped trench environment is the perfect banquet for the virus. Armies of all factions, from the Allied forces to the German Empire, would be wiped out by up to 70 to 80%. The military superpowers would completely collapse from within. Modern national governments would disintegrate. When half the administrative apparatus, police, judges, and leaders disappear, the law becomes a scrap of paper. The world map would be torn apart. The British Empire, proud of the phrase, "the sun never sets," would no longer have enough of a navy to control its colonies. India, Egypt, and South Africa would descend into localized chaos, fracturing into countless small territories ruled by local warlords, those who hold the last weapons and food stockpiles. America would never become a global superpower. Instead, the nation would shatter into isolated, barricaded autonomous zones, ready to shoot on sight any stranger carrying signs of illness. In real history, the H1N1 virus knocked on the doors of many prominent figures, but fortunately, most of them survived. But in this hypothetical world with a 50% mortality rate, imagine we are flipping a death coin for each of them. And the high probability is that the virus's scythe would harvest a swath of names whose disappearance would permanently alter the trajectory of humanity. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the great future president of the United States, who steered the nation through the Great Depression and World War II, contracted the Spanish flu in 1918 while on a ship returning from Europe. In this scenario, pneumonia would snatch his life right on the cold ocean. Without Roosevelt, without the New Deal policies to save the American economy, the U.S. might have sunk deep into a bloody civil war between communist and fascist movements right in the heart of America in the 1930s. Across the ocean, a young politician named Winston Churchill was also bedridden with the flu. If he breathed his last, Britain would lose its most resilient roaring lion during its darkest hours later on. A 17-year-old teenager named Walt Disney, then driving an ambulance for the Red Cross, also contracted the disease. If the young Disney did not survive the cytokine storm, an entire empire of entertainment culture, cartoon characters that defined the childhoods of billions throughout the 20th century, would be completely erased from the timeline. And of course, we cannot ignore a German army dispatch runner named Adolf Hitler. If the virus ravaged his lungs in 1918, the Nazi Party would lose its most brilliant demagogue. World War II, in the scale and form we know, would never happen. But don't rejoice too quickly. The absence of Hitler does not mean the world would be at peace. With a devastated Europe, its population halved, its nations shattered, the old continent would sink into an era of localized violence, endless, brutal small-scale wars fought to claim the last uncontaminated coal mines and wheat fields. It would be a Mad Max-style world, but with the technology of the steam age. One of the most bitter truths of modern civilization is that it depends on a minority of highly specialized brains. Electrical engineers, precision mechanics, surgeons, chemists. Their knowledge cannot be passed on overnight. When 50% of the global population is wiped out, humanity's knowledge network will suffer fatal broken links. The surviving farmers or factory workers will look at giant electrical turbines and complex train locomotives like they are staring at alien artifacts. No one knows how to repair them when they break down. No one knows how to synthesize medicines. Technology would be pushed back to the 18th century. Major cities would be abandoned because they would have become massive disease traps with no food supply systems. Survivors would drag each other away, fleeing to the countryside to re-establish self-sufficient agricultural communities. The magnificent avenues of Paris, New York, or London would gradually be swallowed by vegetation, becoming moss-covered concrete ruins, where future generations would tell legends of an era of light and machines, before God's wrath descended. But the cruelest tragedy would not just lie in the Western world. Look at isolated indigenous communities. In actual history, when the Spanish flu reached the Seward Peninsula in Alaska in late 1918, it wiped out 72 of the 80 residents of an Inuit village in a mere 5 days. The mortality rate was up to 90% because they had absolutely no immune memory of previous flu strains. So in this scenario of a virus 20 times stronger, what would await them? Absolute extinction. Ancient indigenous cultures from the Inuit in the Arctic, the Maori in New Zealand, to the tribes deep in the Amazon jungle would be permanently erased from the book of humanity. Thousands of languages, belief systems, and treasures of indigenous knowledge would vanish into thin air, leaving invisible voids that could never be filled in the diverse tapestry of humankind. By now, you are probably feeling suffocated by the despair of this timeline. But historical science isn't just one shade of black. There are always scholars and economists who propose contrary and highly controversial theories. They ask a razor-sharp question: could a pandemic that wipes out half of humanity actually bring benefits to the survivors? To answer, they look to the past, retracing the pages of the Black Death that devastated 14th century Europe. The plague bacteria killed between 30% and 50% of the old continent's population. What was the consequence? The rotting feudal system that had lasted for centuries suddenly collapsed. Why? Because human labor suddenly became extremely scarce. Serfs, people who were previously tied to a lord's land and worked like unpaid machines, suddenly possessed immense negotiating power. If a lord didn't pay high wages or feed them well, they would leave to work for another lord who was desperate for labor. Wages skyrocketed, and the living standards of the bottom class of society were elevated like never before. Wealth was violently yet effectively redistributed, creating a new middle class, and indirectly sparking the glorious Renaissance era later on. Applying that theory to 1918, we would see a bizarre picture. After the initial years of chaos, the survivors emerging from the ashes would inherit all the wealth, land, and natural resources of the deceased. The poorest could suddenly move into the abandoned mansions of the elite. But the biggest change would be in social structure. With tens of millions of healthy young men buried deep in the ground due to the cytokine storm, women would become the sole remaining labor force and leadership. The feminist movement would not need to endure decades of slow struggle. They would immediately take over the factories, legislative assemblies, and medical research institutes, simply because there was no other choice. A new matriarchal era might rise from the ruins of a male-led civilization. Simultaneously, the severe labor shortage would force the remaining engineering minds to find every way to maximize automation. The drive for survival would propel more advanced mechanical inventions, potentially accelerating the birth of computers and robotics decades earlier than in reality, just to compensate for the hands of the dead. It would be a blood-soaked golden age, built on the white bones of billions of people, a price too steep for any moral standard to accept. Take a deep breath and return to our reality. The 1918 pandemic is an open wound in human history, a horrific tragedy that claimed 50 million lives. But looking at the scenarios above, we cannot help but feel a chilling sense of gratitude. We were lucky. Humanity won a survival lottery when the mortality rate stopped at just 2.5%. It was painful enough to serve as a lesson, devastating enough to spur the birth of modern preventive medicine and virology, but still gentle enough not to completely erase the civilization we have today. However, the universe does not have a habit of handing out lucky lottery tickets forever. A scenario involving a respiratory virus with a 50% mortality rate is not a figment of Hollywood screenwriters' imagination, it is the constant obsession of virologists today. Look at the H5N1 avian flu. Since its discovery, the mortality rate among humans who accidentally contracted through direct contact has always hovered above 50%. Currently, it is very difficult to transmit from human to human. But viruses are tireless mutation machines. It only takes a few minor scrambles in the genetic code, just one unlucky pig infected simultaneously with a fast-spreading human flu and a highly lethal bird flu, for biology to automatically breed a Frankenstein monster combining both elements, the transmission speed of H1N1 and the mortality rate of H5N1. When that day comes, we will no longer be living in 1918 with steam-powered trains and ships. The new killer will buy tickets on commercial Boeing and Airbus flights, traveling from one continent to another in less than 10 hours. It will land in high-density megacities with tens of millions of residents, not the small slums of the early 20th century. What do you think about this dark scenario? Will our modern world with artificial intelligence, mRNA vaccines, and advanced healthcare systems be strong enough to withstand a pathogen with a 50% mortality rate, or will our over-reliance on fragile global supply chains cause us to collapse even faster than our ancestors did in 1918? If tomorrow the world truly lost half its population, which social rule do you think would be broken first? Share your perspectives and your own survival scenarios in the comments section below, because discussions like these are not just science fiction, they are how we rehearse for the future. If you are captivated by these tough questions about history and science, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to join us as we step into the next unexpected alternate timelines. Thank you for bravely walking to the very end of this brutal truth. See you next time.